Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to see you all. We'll be giving everyone a little bit of time to kind of circle in and join us. We're talking today. We're talking about Homelander for president in the opportunity to just kind of version of a post-comic con convention panel. We initially had hoped to do this as a panel at New York Comic Con, but now we're bringing it to you on our beautiful YouTube channel and other sites. So we'll give everyone a couple minutes to fill in. But in the meantime, how is it going, Alum, Gon, and Maytha? Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having us. Going well and onward.
I think, Gon, you're muted.
And it's not just a post-Comic-Con panel, it's now a post-election panel. So, lots of feelings in the room and in the world, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to dig into, but really happy to be here with all of you.
Yeah, I'm trying to be present, including making sure I don't have food in my mouth from stuffing in food in between meetings and appointments, but really excited for this moment.
Glad to hear we're trying to stay nourished under times that are very dragging and draining. That's the most, I feel like the least we can do is try to keep ourselves together. I think we've gotten a little bit of good buffer time to get into our first just general question for the day. So at TOA, we love good stories. And so while we give them just a bit more time for people to join, would y'all mind sharing your favorite thing that you're reading, watching, or listening to that brings out your inner nerd?
Wow. Well, I can start. I'm reading right now the Saga graphic novel series, which is amazing for people who haven't discovered it, Brian K. Vaughan. And I'm also reading the Batman, The Killing Joke, Alan Moore, which I have to say is kind of an anti-social justice comic book, but it was a lot of the foundation for the new Joker movies. Good, bad, and ugly.
I didn't want to go first because I feel like this is a cop out of nerdiness because it's so normcore. But I have been obsessed with the series My Brilliant Friend on HBO. But the nerdy thing I'm doing is listening to the audiobook in English and Italian. So one chapter after the other. I think it's one of the most remarkable feats in long-term storytelling about relationships. And as I said, it's normcore because it's #1 best book by the New York Times for the 21st centuries. But got to approach it as a nerd.
Awesome. Let's see. Well, a couple things. For those of you who are parents out there with young kids, I've been reading the Zita the Space Girl series, which is awesome, particularly if you have young girls. I've got 2, and it's been really inspiring to both of them and a lot of fun. I've also been watching the Penguin series online, which is an extraordinary, and somehow watching a fictional version of a narcissistic sociopath betray everyone on their way to power is cathartic, at least more relieving than watching the real thing. So yeah, if you need to have one toe dipped in reality and the other in fiction, then that's a place to go for sure.
There's something about the removal, the attachment you're able to have for fiction that you appreciate more than real life having the same overtones, right? I just finished this very long book, and I love. I'm a book nerd, so when you said nerd about book, I'm like, of course it's nerdy. You can be a book nerd. I just finished this long book called The Door to Midnight. It's like the second book in a series by R.R. Birdy, and it's basically an author, and the whole series is a fantasy series where the main character keeps telling stories within stories within stories, and it just like you're just nerding out about storytelling the whole way through, which I really enjoy. But it's super long because there's just so many stories happening all the time, and I feel like there's something about like just being able to like lavish and revel in storytelling the whole way through that's pretty cool. Um, and I see people are going to be adding recommendations to the chat, so please do that. I know we'll be surfacing them throughout the conversation, so you take your time and like let them come on up, and we'll share them. Um, let's go on and get into the conversation. So, as we mentioned, convention season may be over, the election may be over, but there's not really a deadline on being able to like talk about pop culture and the links between that and what we see in real life. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in into our panel, where we're going to be doing that in our kind of oversight of the idea of Homelander for president. We're very grateful today to have founder of the Opportunity Agenda, professor of practice at Harvard Law School, and co-author of 1/6, the graphic novel, Alan Jenkins, as well as his co-author and New York Times bestselling author and artist, Gon Golan, as well as Maytha Alhassen, who is a writer, producer, journalist, and lecturer at Stanford University, for sharing their time and ingenuity with us today. I am Porshea Patterson, research manager at the Opportunity Agenda, aforementioned big book nerd, and also a podcaster who talks about nerdy things like Game of Thrones and fantasy books by Black authors. So very well into my realm today. If you're new on any of our work, please make sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You'll be seeing links for that go up as our esteemed panelists talk about themselves, but you also can do that for the Opportunity Agenda at Op Agenda across our socials. You can also visit our website to learn more about TOA's work in democracy and how we support artists, organizers, and activists to tell stories that move people to create change in their community. For instance, we have a program called Creative Change Retreat, and both Gon and Maytha are alumni of it. You can find out more details about that and so much more on our website. But we want to get straight into the discussion, and that means giving some space to, again, these esteemed panelists to talk about themselves. So, Alan, Gon, and Maytha, would you please share what you want people to know about you and what you do? Maytha, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Sure. It's always hard to identify the categories of things I do. So I like to tell people that I'm a freedom doula and an engaged witness. So the categories of being an artist, an organizer, journalist, professor, writer, producer, all of that fit towards those ends. And that's how I see my work. But people on the outside might know me as a writer producer on Ramy. Previous to that, I was a professor who was studying the representations of Muslims and Arabs on screen. And it was such a beautiful privilege, and continues to be able to put those stories from the Muslim and Arab community out into the world, including one that I'm really excited about that just premiered a couple of weeks ago called American Muslims, History Revealed, which looks at the history of Muslims on Turtle Island from before this was a country to the present. Well, this series takes us up to the 1950s, but as you see here, there's this formerly enslaved man who was painted by a presidential painter named Yaro Marmut. And that's up on PBS and the YouTube channel, so I really encourage you all to see it. We've been getting a lot of great reception for it. And that's just some of the work I'm doing, and I'm really excited to be in conversation with the co-panelists.
Thanks, Maytha. How about you, Gon?
Great to be here. My name's Gon Golan. I am an artist, writer, and activist who really believes that, art and culture are one of the prime movers of social change and always have been. So that's where I've chosen to live my life. And anywhere culture making can play a role in mobilizing people, in helping build grassroots power, in helping evolve our strategies to become more effective and more sophisticated. That's what I like to do. And so sometimes that might be helping organize a mass march, but sometimes it can be creating a graphic novel and a comic book, which is why I'm here today. And so I'm just happy to be with all of you. If you want to check out some projects, I'm also the co-creator of the Climate Clock, climateclock.world, which tracks the world's progress on meeting on implementing the climate solutions we need within the time that we have. And so you can go check that out as well.
And great to see everybody. I'm Alan Jenkins. I'm a professor of practice at Harvard Law School now, but really my career has always been at the intersection of storytelling, law, and social justice. So I've been a civil rights lawyer. I'm a recovering Supreme Court litigator. I was at the Ford Foundation for many years doing international and domestic human rights work. And then about almost 20 years ago, co-founded the Opportunity Agenda with Phoebe Eng and Brian Smedley and Bill Lan Lee, because I really felt that we as social justice advocates were not taking communication and culture seriously as change strategies. We were good at litigation and organizing and research, but often we could not kind of close the deal on our mission or maintain and protect our past gains because we weren't telling our own story in a way that could reach everyday people. The Creative Change Retreat that the Opportunity Agenda continues to have, bringing together artists and creatives with advocates and others, is core to that theory that we need to be better storytellers and we need to work together to tell stories rooted in opportunity and social justice and human rights. And now at Harvard Law School, I teach classes on race and the law, on narrative and Supreme Court jurisprudence, on strategic communications for social justice, and have been very excited to be the co-author with Gan of 1/6, the graphic novel, which asks the question, what if the January 6, 2021 insurrection had been successful? It felt like science fiction when we started writing 2 years ago. Now it feels like prediction, but we'll get a chance to talk about that. Porshea, you're on mute.
Each year, we're getting closer and closer to the feeling that we're in unprecedented times. And I really wanted to have this discussion as a way to talk about the way that entertainment has become more popular as an escape as we're starting to feel this existentialism. Recently, there's been a surge in fictional properties that reflect these existential concerns and the powers that have brought us on the brink of all this really large and terrible change, right? In the Amazon series, The Boys, Homelander, a megalomaniac superhuman, uses the structure of a global corporation called VOT to exert power by manipulating public opinion. So to the concept and thought of like society itself being a place where public opinion can be manipulated and that it can be taken over by powers that have their own things at play. I wanted to talk to you, Alan and Gan, about your graphic novel 1/6 in comics, but going into a graphic novel, and how it imagines the world would look if the titular riot had been successful. Do you see any similarities in the way that populism is depicted in your work and in The Boys? And what do these works reflect about the current political moment?
Yeah, a lot to dig in there, and we encourage people to check out the comic because it very much covers this. But what we have seen is that there's new forms of populism that can be fabricated and can be quite based in disinformation and blatantly factually untrue things. And there's new technologies that have given given the ability of people who want to practice this kind of disinformation, entirely new ways to get into people's homes, into their minds, into all their devices. And it's, it is something out of a science fiction supervillain. This is the kind of stuff you imagine that a James Bond villain would be doing, and it is happening right now in real time. It's all around us. And in our book, we do talk about disinformation, and we've seen disinformation happening in the world we live in through conspiracy theories. There's a lot of scenes in the book where you see people being drawn into QAnon and just an amalgam of all the crazy, toxic, false stories that people are inundated with that really prey upon their fears and their insecurities and their confusion to the point that they're not sure what is true and what isn't true. So that appears in the book. We see that in Homelander, in The Boys as well, but most of all, we're seeing it in our political reality. And with that is a tremendous amount of historical revisionism, not just telling false stories about what's happening right now. I have family that lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Their city was destroyed by a completely unprecedented storm, driven by the increasing intensity of weather around the world through climate change. And yet the stories that were perpetrated on the ground were that a political party had access to new weather changing technology, and it just got absurd from there, rather than dealing with what the actual issues were. And that was, had some measurable effect on the election. And that's just one example of the stuff that we're seeing everywhere around us. And so that's in the book. We also talk about the prevalence of religion and how that as a form of pop culture has really been used in Christian nationalism in particular. There's a lot of scenes in the comics where we see that has been weaponized to take advantage of people's faith, take advantage of people's need for security and to make sense out of the world, into a political force to support a particular party and really oppose many of their own interests. So those themes appear, and I think one thing that we talk about a little bit in the book, but I think is really important just to keep in mind, is how division and fear and micro targeting is being used to find any division within any community, to separate people from each other and to make us fearful of each other. And so, I'm looking out across the political landscape, and you can see how people who love veterans are being turned against immigrants. People who are men of any race are being turned against women, against immigrants, against LGBTQ members. And so that is stuff that we are seeing out in the world. We try and bring it into our book as much as possible. But Alan, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. You said it well. I mean, I think one of the things about The Boys, the series, that always jumps out at me is the idea of manipulating media and iconography, right, and storytelling at some level, to develop hero worship of elites, corporate elites, and figureheads who could care less about the people, and yet are, benefits of their adulation. And are punishing them in return, and we're seeing that in the real world. We also see it in our comic book series, and the notion that there's really an authoritarian playbook, right, that would-be tyrants and dictators use all around the world. They've used it in the United States in the past, in the Jim Crow South or in the McCarthy era, of blaming and harassing underdogs, the most vulnerable, as scapegoats, of condemning the media while being masters at using it, at telling the story that only I can save you. Don't believe your ears and your eyes. Gon and I have heard a remarkable number of myths about the insurrection. And I won't repeat them here to give them more currency, but the spectrum is from it didn't happen to the FBI caused it, and everything in between. And that's all with a purpose, right? The more confusing and chaotic and fear-inducing our society feels, the more demagogues can exploit it. And we see that in The Boys. We see it in our comic book, and as Gan noted, we are seeing it play out in real life in the United States and in many other countries around the world.
Thanks so much, y'all. Yeah, I really want to pick up on there's so many different things at play when we think about this world stage as it is now, and how The Boys is pretty good about showcasing the ways that works in a fictional way. Talking about the writing room for like The Boys. I want to get into Maytha and you being part of the Ramy writing room that has Ramy writing room that has developed stories that humanize communities that we've seen dominant culture demonize through xenophobic and Islamophobic narratives. How does recognition of the power imbalance between like dominant culture and like the scapegoated cultures shape the stories that you craft? And how would you describe the escape it offers viewers in like comparison to the escape that The Boys offers, kind of through like its satire and critique of popular culture?
I think actually some viewers or people who hate watch us would tell you that unfortunately we're not an escape, because especially the last season, you can see the poster again if you want to throw that on screen. The line for the season was "Beware of false prophets," and we meant that in terms of, as had been said, about religious leaders who carry a messianic end of the world message. We meant that in terms of American capitalism as well. And I think that's what comes into play when we're thinking about something that The Boys doesn't engage in a significant critique, but tries to have this analysis of hero worship, corporations, elite protections, and the kinds of, as folks have already said, the kinds of manipulations that are necessary to maintain that hegemonic control. And of course, their versions of giving us some of the scapegoated communities is quite interesting, and we don't rely on The Boys to tell those stories. I mean, I could say a whole lot about how I haven't finished the series, and to be honest, I just started watching it when I was asked to do this panel. And it's funny that when they introduced women every single time, for most of the part, it was like different versions of white women to play the characters of the Voight 7. And for us, we clearly try to think a little bit more fuller or holistically about telling our character stories, because if we ended up on a show like The Boys, I think the Vietnamese woman Kamiko, I believe it is one note. Is her whole story is being turned into a supervillain terrorist, and we don't. Besides her relationship with her brother and her other relationship with another man, I don't know if I get a sense of the story of who she is and what other motivations propel her. Anyways, I'm taking some sort of different tangents to come to your question. I think one thing that is really solidly important about the last season of Ramy, as I had mentioned what the tagline was, is that all of us, being a part of American empire, have participated in a spiritual contract that requires a certain kind of violence. Even if we come from communities that have resisted it, what does it mean if we are not actively in refusal around it? And it actually, in our show, means that there's a deep, deep God-shaped hole. And what happens when you try to fill that with the makings of American empire? And I think that also parallels a discussion I have not really seen about the populism of Agent Orange, which is that because most Americans know that the institutions are not working for them, there's a giant vacuum and he's filling it. And what does it mean if another party is saying everything's fine, we just need to fix a little bit of the institutions, then that answer is not going to make as much sense as the misinformation that Gan was saying was running rampant in Asheville. It's just not going to make sense for the deep kind of pain that people are experiencing around the spiritual contract, around an empire collapsing. So that's the journey our characters take in that season, is what happens when they finally have their coming to Jesus moment with making it around American imperial dreams, like going to law school, but that's not fulfilling. That, like, hitting up against the fact that she can't save an undocumented person. Okay, then there's a whole kind of journey that our character Dina goes on. Ramy, my father loses everything he came here for, so I'm just going to make the bag. I'm going to make a whole bunch of money, and I'm going to ignore everything that went into making that happen. And then again, a sort of coming to Jesus moment. I think the other thing I would just say is we don't shy away from making messy characters. And I think the sort of response in this climate to how we're being scapegoated for how we appear in dominant narratives is to want to be perfect victims, to be angels, to be unblemished. But in the system, the reality is we will never be, when there's a contention of outsourcing the failures of this empire onto us. So we need to embrace the messiness, as hard as it might be. And I mean, that's one of the big things that I actually enjoyed on The Boys, was the messiness of each character.
Thank you so much. Yeah, talking about, like, there's so many good points and salient points that have come from that, this opening question, these opening thoughts around, like, reality and, like, the way that reality can be constructed and reconstructed into different narratives, that some of them are in, like, defense of the communities that are being pinpointed as the problem, and others are just, that's the way that the construction has been happening, and the way that it's been working for the opposition to make these, like, messages about who's in the wrong. And a lot of it all plays into fear. Even the defensiveness, I think, it falls into trying to respond in a way that is protective, but comes from a fear-based protection instead of it being kind of like with love, and the messiness that you're talking about there, Maytha. And in The Boys, Homelander is able to mobilize fellow superhumans and humans in positions of power by invoking their fear. His methods are often effective because his followers represent, like, a toxic sense of community. Like, they enjoy the messiness, is kind of like they revel in the destruction and toxicity surrounding, like, how Homelander moves and what he says and what he does. And they all kind of follow along with whatever main narrative that is constructed, despite whatever evidence are shown to the contrary, because it aligns with how they identify themselves and how they feel a sense of belonging in community around other folks who are also part of this community around Homelander. So I want to take a moment to do a little organizational plug on who the Opportunity Agenda is, which is a narrative-focused organization. We research how narratives are created, and we train people in how to tell stories or craft messages using shared values that challenge or shift narratives. In our research on fear-based narratives, very apropos for this conversation, we look specifically at the ones that are fear-based narratives mired in white supremacy, and have identified a couple of different narrative themes as opportunities to be responsive to public fears. One of them, one of our takeaways, is that we need to know the threats. While we want to rely on proactive narratives, we also cannot ignore the narratives that threaten the success of multiracial democracy, such as "they are the real racists," which asserts that bringing race into conversation reveals a person's racial bias. There's another thought that the concept of, like, woke communist conspiracy, that any plans which center communities of color or people across different marginalizations are based in an effort to from a shadow communist movement, and those are often used to make people defensive and like put the like power display on a shadow decision maker versus like the actual evidence that we see in front of us, right? So in order for us to be effective as we talk about these fear-based narratives, we have to be prepared for how those threats evolve. And that involves also being ready to counter the blame, which allows us to undermine several pro-white supremacy narratives, such as our streets aren't safe, asserting that marginalized groups are responsible for the lack of security in regularly visited areas. And also they're stealing our money, which builds on naming a particular group based on an issue. And so what we present as like our narrative change effort is thinking about shifting the narrative by replacing these stories with the real underlying threats underneath it all and the solution to those threats. And so I really appreciate all of you taking the time to name the ways that people are moved by stories, and even whenever it's counter to what they see in front of them, because the story is for whatever reason more compelling to them. And so in the next set of questions, I'd like to explore how your work sets out to neutralize any fear-based threats that you see and have noticed against inclusive community practices, and how you're able to build morale for folks that are more community-centered, or you hope to build morale that are more community-centered as you do your work. So each of you, all of you, at whatever time you like to start, what role do you believe art has in responding to societal fears? And what are some community-based practices that you have highlighted in your work that you think are effective in countering fear?
I have thoughts, but I'm actually going to call on Gan, who's the real artist in our partnership, and then I could tag team or
sure. Being put on the spot here. I think touching on one of the points earlier about division and fear, and any lack of knowing each other becomes now a gap that can be exploited. Any unfamiliarity we have with others, with other communities, with other people, becomes a place to sow division. And again, technology has now allows for micro-targeting, where people can find out people's biases very quickly, and then just the algorithm will drive all kinds of specially made content to those people to get one group of people upset at another group of people that they don't know, or people within their own community. And so that has been a real that is a whole new sort of weapon of mass division that we are seeing that social media is being used for. The role that arts can play, maybe the strongest at the personal spiritual level, is the one that it's always played, which is getting us to see each other and getting us to know each other better. Sometimes it's called empathy, but it's also just getting to know each other's stories. We try to do that in the book. Our story is not a political diatribe. For those of you who haven't read it, it is a action-packed adventure thriller, but it's told through the personal stories of four very different people who have to endure the events of January 6th and how it changes all of them. And they're across the political spectrum. We have a journalist who grew up in Africa and is familiar with autocratic regimes. We have an Asian American congressional staffer who works inside the system. We have an Afro-Latino first responder who has to see the casualties on January 6th and loses her husband, who's a Capitol police officer. And we have a MAGA supporter whose own son is inducted into the disinformation QAnon cult and then channeled into militias and violence. And we try and show that all of these people are motivated by different fears and aspirations that can lead in all kinds of unexpected directions. And I think it's really important at this time that we listen and we try and understand people that we're being told to fear. And this is true on all sides of the spectrum. And as we need to build the kinds of political coalitions that are needed to fight against authoritarianism, and to help people realize that their interests are better served if we're all in this together as opposed to every person for themselves. It's building those bridges by understanding what parts of us connect to other parts of people, even people that we may disagree with. People are incredibly complex. We all hold multiple identities. All of those identities can be elicited and mobilized in different ways that would point people in very different directions in terms of what they support politically. And so there, I'm not talking about people who might be on the total opposite end of the political spectrum as myself, but that's not what won this election. What won this election is a lot of people who were confused about who better represented their interest and didn't feel heard, as Maytha mentioned, by a system that feels like it's failing and crumbling and leaving a deep sense of alienation among people. And so that empathy piece, both in writing characters, in telling stories, but having it really draw upon people's lived experiences of so many different kinds, that's really important to surface in our storytelling. It's the absolute core. Then we can talk about how we can use art to mobilize people and to build community, to build power and have a real strategy around it. But first we need to connect to each other.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Maytha.
Go for it. I just wanted to pull up a quote that I don't want to paraphrase, so you can go.
Okay. So yeah, just to add to what Gan has said, and Porshea, to be responsive to your question about how do we kind of mobilize our communities. So a big part of our series is hope, resistance, reconstruction. So the story is told, as Gan noted, by 4 very different characters. They are ideologically as well as demographically diverse. But when we meet them, they are a part of a growing resistance. And, we go back and forth in time, but we're always kind of coming back to the idea that as bad as things have gotten in our series and in the real world, there are people of different perspectives who love our democracy and want to advance a multicultural democracy. And so particularly in issue 4, which will be out soon, it's really, a roadmap for not only how everyday people can oppose authoritarian and white supremacist and Christian nationalist regimes, but how we can move forward together towards a more perfect union. And so that's told in a dramatic way, in an engaging way. I wouldn't want to read this series if it were all doom and gloom and negative. We also partnered with Western States Center, which is a fantastic pro-democracy organization headquartered in the Pacific Northwest. And together we created an education and action guide so that readers who, are angry or moved and want to take action have something immediate they can do. The action guide is free. There's a QR code inside every comic book so that they can access it. They can also find it at 16comics.org. And thousands of people have utilized this toolkit to work on a democracy in their local communities, to push back against hate and bigotry, to defend librarians, to volunteer as election workers, to demand that their local officials speak the truth about our democracy, and then take votes that will uphold it. So, this is a really crucial part, is making sure that even as we're ringing, an alarm bell about what could happen in our society, we're also providing ideas about what we can all be doing together to not only to preserve the democracy we have, but to actually build a better, more inclusive, more just democracy. And that's a crucial part of our storytelling, but also of the larger enterprise.
I have so many thoughts in response to this question, because there's a question around fear. There's a question for mobilizing around fear. There's a question around how do we mobilize over a different kind of community vision that is rooted in care, in love, in sustainability, regenerativity. I want to tackle, well, let's tackle the culture conversation. So a line that most folks might be familiar with now from Toni Cade Bambara is where she says, this is decades ago, that as a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible. And something we've said, but not said explicitly, subtextually, is that the work we do as cultural workers, as artists, has a vision. And now I'm going to quote somebody else, Fabiana Rodriguez and Center for Cultural Power. They have taught me that artists and cultural workers are 10 years ahead of politics, the electoral process. And it's not just because it moves slower. It's because, as Alan and Gan were saying, they were making a work of science fiction, but it was prediction. And it was prediction because we were so rooted in trying to figure out cultural ordering, social organizing. And that gives us a portal into a different kind of world and reality. And again, if people might have noticed, I lean towards spiritual sort of analysis as well when I think about some of these questions. But I also want to say on this fear setup that I think both political parties had a fear message. Both of them, if you looked at it, said that this is going to be the last election in America if you don't elect us. Literally, both of them said it. I mean, it was Elon Musk saying it about Kamala Harris. And then, of course, it was us saying it about Agent Orange and his whole posse of supervillains, right? But that felt like a truth for groups of folks. But again, mobilizing around fear, we're not Trump, wasn't enough, right? And actually, the Republican Party did have a message that wasn't just rooted in fear. It was, we are going to fix the things that made you fearful. I mean, I'm seeing all these kinds of memes right now in jubilation around RFK being appointed some sort of health director position, you know, the great sort of online grifter. And that's because there is a sense that we have a failing food system that needs to be regulated, fixed, but they're going for their methodology of deregulation and privatization, which we know is going to be a massive fallout, right? So it is about telling more compelling stories about what our vision as culture workers is. And, you know, I was just talking to a student, and I'll bring in some of the student angle because they definitely give me a lot more, I say being prayerful instead of hopeful. But I was telling a student that after the 2016 election, when the executive order started to come down, that January 20th or 21st, I started to realize, wow, the Republicans, the right wing, the far right see us as much more coordinated and united than we really are. And I said, if you actually took the playbook of these executive orders and mapped the relationships with our communities, imagine the kind of Voltron force we could be. And so I did this whole lecture, and it was powerful to do it on college campuses because they would invite different student groups and then start to see moments and opportunities for solidarity building or witness work, as I say. And then going back to my students, I lecture in the Center for Comparative Studies of Race and Ethnicity, and there's a capstone class in order to graduate with that major to create public-facing research work. And I have students making a reproductive garden on campus, reproductive sovereignty garden, and teaching people how to self-abort if they need to. I have students doing revitalization language projects in their Native communities when there's only 10 elders who speak the language left. So I have so much, and this is why I continue to teach, and I'm sure Alan's going to say this is why he continues to teach, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm seeing from these younger generations of folks and the way that they're just like, they've skipped so many levels of required political education and they're just doing the work now. And it's powerful to see it. I have students doing the work in the Eastern Coachella Valley around environmental racism and community resilience to it. And they're undergrads. So yeah, I'm more prayerful than I'm fearful.
I love that so much. I think there is very important and like crucial for us to always like keep in the radius of while we're seeing so much that is going wrong, what is going right. There's always so much that's going on along that's moving things forward, and is more inclusive and thoughtful about so many different aspects of the world, from like making sure languages don't die out to like making sure people are fed and have the ability to live the quality of life they would like to, even if like regime makes it hard for them to do so. I do want to like bring up one of the comments that we got from shout out to the Beyond Democracy cohort. Raymond Sweet mentioned, like as we were having our discussion about the role of fear, how people were responsive to that in this election, but also like there's a level of like the misinformation just being something that they accepted as real, even though they were being lied to, and that's that they voted for exactly the like rage of like sitting with like being xenophobic and practicing misogynoir and racism and transphobia. Like that was what galvanized them to get out and vote. So I think the question here is more around the concept of, while there is like one, I think when I think about like community practices and like getting people motivated to move by that, I think you like hit some, and I think it's also some of the points that like Raymond was like responsive to. There's so many things that drive people who aren't want to be more progressive. They're not seeing being responded to like from a political party right now. And so like for me, I think Raymond's point is like they're changing, like the change that Republicans said they wanted, they actually are doing, the racism, the like xenophobia, all that stuff. Whereas what happened to keeping people from like to get out and vote and mobilize to vote, who showed up in like former elections, who are motivated by progressive ideas, right? So is it just that they need to hear a party say they're going to enact that work, or is that something that's like community mobilization? And how do you get that community mobilization to be representative on these levels, like statewide, outside of just like the local immediate work? And where do you see art playing a role in that, if you do at all?
You know, something else that really calls into the themes of the boys, and I don't know if we've really touched upon it, is the investment in patriarchal, masculine. We talked about hero worship, but that sort of hierarchical dream of being on the top, being the Elon Musk, being or finding some kind of male model that is winning, that it's making it. And of course, not all men believe in this. And of course, there are women invested in this too, and non-binary folks and whatnot. But I think when, and I hate to like relitigate some of these events and whatnot, but when Trump caught cases and he beat them to some degree, of course, in an underhanded way, and still going through cases, when he was a target of 2 assassination attempts. And I was like, when he put his hand up in the air after he got shot, I was like, wow, this man studies narrative and culture movements. Like, he is so thoroughly sophisticated in this. How could anybody who's been shot know to go like this for a photo op? This man is seen as invincible. And so I think I hear what Raymond is saying, and I think it's actually a really sort of profound insight, which there's really deeply embedded desires to be that kind of invincible. And it goes back to the revering of the superheroes, because in a climate where we don't have that social safety net that progressive values would offer us, like universal healthcare, like really good quality free public education system, that we have this, again, strange amalgamation where some things are working a little bit for some communities and they're not for others. And they're all about to be at risk because there hasn't been a sufficient drive to be bold with our values, instead of what we're fighting against. I don't know if that answered it, but I think, yeah, I've been sitting a lot and thinking about patriarchal masculinity and superheroes.
Yeah, I really agree. And I guess I would add a couple of things. One is regarding the misinformation issue in Raymond's question. One piece is that there are some real strategies for dealing with misinformation and myths. The Opportunity Agenda has resources on that, and I think you might have more coming. And so I'm not going to go in depth there, but we do know that people are invulnerable to facts that don't fit within a story and a set of values that they can understand and connect to. And we also know from research and experience that people are carrying around multiple stories and sets of values. And it's up to us to tap the stories and the values that are, social justice values that bring us together, that solve problems, that are inclusive rather than exclusionary. And, the research shows almost everyone is carrying around all of those values at any given time. But in a vacuum, as everyone in this panel has said, the person who tries to tap our worst instincts and values and tells us that he will solve all of our problems is going to win. One of the things you'll see in issue 3 of 1/6, the graphic novel, which is about to come out, it's actually done and we're almost ready to hit send, is that we're not going to be able to rely on politicians to tell the story that embodies our values. We're going to have to tell that story, and they will come along. When we tell a story rooted in a set of shared values that is compelling, that includes everyone, that is hopeful and solution-oriented, not only will mass audiences and voters come along, but politicians will too. And we've seen that happen many, many times. They might come along kicking and screaming. Their donors might, be kicking and screaming even louder than they are. But nothing succeeds like success. And it's really up to us. This is, this terrible moment is also an opportunity for those of us who believe in human rights and opportunity to come together and really craft and tell our own story. I won't go too far down the historical rabbit hole, but many of you who are watching, I'm sure, know that after the kind of extremist Republican Barry Goldwater lost in a landslide to Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964, the conservative movement, which was highly racist, explicitly racist, much of it at that time, as were many Democrats, went back to basics and created a new story, a new methodology that has served them for over 60 years since. And we have to be more creative, more inclusive, more innovative in doing a better version of that for this 21st century. So it's on us. That's actually good news in my view, because relying on politicians to do it has simply not done the job.
Yeah, I'd love to riff on this. I think we're really getting to the heart of key things that are at play here. And thank you for the question. Returning back to the fact that people, I think we're all hitting on this point, people are an actual mix of competing stories about how to address their needs. And we saw that in this election. And this is, as we see, and where the Democrats lost ground, they lost by percentage of the vote, they lost an incredible amount of ground within Latino communities, among youth, which is astounding, and also in Native and Indigenous communities, who were basically who were voting along the lines of poor rural white communities. So there was an incredible amount of lost ground, and I would say that the data is really clearly showing that while racism, xenophobia, transphobia, all of these things were major factors for a large part of the electorate, and probably a lot of people aren't admitting to how much of a factor it was. What we are seeing is that the economic kitchen table issues were primary for people, that is where they saw, and that's just a way of saying people's most basic material needs were not being addressed. And the issue is that if you don't provide a solution, a real solution, your opponent will come in with a false solution. And that's what we see with Trump, is making promises that he has no intention of fulfilling, and is going to double down on policies that actually enrich a very few people at the expense of everyone else. And it goes to this larger structural problem that this country has been in for quite some time. You could say all the way back to 2006 and the financial crisis and the Gulf War, where people understood that our foreign policy was, that the public was no longer buying our foreign policy excuses and these absolutely destructive, pointless wars, as well as our economic system. And that is not, and we have been in change election cycles ever since then, where it's always about, that's how Obama really became president, and used the fact that he was younger candidate and Black as a form of presenting himself as a change candidate, which even people who might have even been racist were voting for him because they saw that he presented a greater possibility of change. And the Democrats, I don't think, have understood that or followed through with that or delivered on the change piece, really leaving it open for fake populists to come in and deliver a false vision of change. And this deeper structural issue is kind of incredible that people are feeling a sense of scarcity, because this is one of the wealthiest societies ever in human history. And the fact that the what's being produced by the society is so unequally distributed that and most of the wealth is into so few hands, that it's creating this virtuous cycle where it's artificial scarcity that is actually driving people's sense of insecurity. The wealth is there, the money is there, but it's more and more people are finding it inaccessible and excluded from the economic system, and so that drives people into a sense of insecurity and crisis, and more likely to turn to charismatic figures who promise to fix it, who of course are not invested in fixing the system, but actually increasing the amount of artificial scarcity. So it creates a vicious cycle that is very advantageous to authoritarians, particularly those who are closely aligned with corporations that are making the most in our economy. And that's, so this election was a victory for big oil. It was a victory for the tech industry. It was a victory for billionaires across the board who are going to get tax cuts delivered to them right away, at the expense of everyone else. And so there is a deeper, a political party that wants to fight against this has to go much deeper into acknowledging the systemic crisis we're in, and give people a far more inspiring and credible vision of a society that works for everyone. And that was not done in this election cycle. It's a huge reason why the Democrats lost. And the fact that there is racism, there is xenophobia, there is transphobia, just means that we have to be even stronger in counteracting these other forces and really get back to basics of meeting people's material needs.
Okay, so quick announcement. So we originally scheduled this panel to wrap up at 5:30, but we really hit on some very tangent thoughts, and the panelists are raring to go with some more thoughts, and the audience are giving us so much great feedback right now. So if no one minds, we'll give it like a 10-minute buffer, and hopefully the platform won't kick us off. And we'll give both Maytha and Alan time because they both have points they want to make, and we really want to hear them. And I really enjoy how much insight we're getting from the audience. So please, everyone, stick around if you can. And yeah, proceed, Maytha and Alan. Whoever wants to take it first.
Maytha, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, there's so much. Again, you just bubbled up a lot, I'm sure, for both of us. But I think bringing up Obama was a really interesting invocation because not only was he pinpointing through his historical experience, who he is as a Black man, it was a point of change. It was also that he was anti-Iraq war, right? And that was major because that was a signal that I'm not following through with the establishment. And so he was signaling a kind of shift that people were looking for. And yeah, again, I'm not trying to at all say he did things well or that I would have approved of, but Trump is very just so intuitive about understanding what people want to hear, right? And so he, from the jump, was anti-Iraq war. And he knew in an atmosphere with Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush and understood that was an anti-establishment election in 2016, that he would transcend that. And so then what happened in 2024, somehow the Democrats thought it was such a good idea when we have a war in Ukraine, supplying Israel with billions of dollars in aid. At the moment, we're saying we don't have enough money or there's misinformation gap happening in response to the hurricanes, that we're going to stand by this administration's policy around war, and we're going to throw the Cheneys in your face. And so what kind of inspiring message is being a cash register for foreign, as Gan was saying, for foreign wars, when people are looking and saying, you know, there was an anti-inflation act, and maybe that was stalled, but I don't see the difference in my lived experience. I don't see my salary going up. I don't see food prices coming down. I don't see any part of making my ends meet or accessing affordable rent available to me anywhere. So the story that was being told was maybe a healthier economy, again, for corporate elites. But what about the rest of us? And so we needed to be bolder with our storytelling, bolder with our values, bolder with our demands. And, you know, I think this was a really difficult moment because it was such a short-term campaign, but it was an opportunity to say we're not going to continue with the Biden vision was. We can shift. And we didn't take that opportunity. But that's why we're here at the Opportunity Agenda, to look for those openings.
Nice segue.
So yeah, Porshea, I wanted to return to your question about art and artists, right? I think one of the gifts that talented artists have is to help us see things that have never existed before, right? Think about Wakanda. You know, a mythical African nation that was untouched by imperialism and the slave trade and colonialism, and look what it accomplished, right? It gives us this notion, of course, no such African country has ever existed that was untouched by all of those pernicious effects. But you know, that vision, both first created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, I think, in Marvel Comics, and then brought to life in the movie, it gives us a vision of something to strive for. And it was inspirational. There was a Wakanda the Vote campaign that registered lots of people to vote. It has spurred, Afrofuturism. It didn't invent it, but it has given it real wings. And, we're going to need artists' vision and creativity to tell us, to show us what would a society look like that doesn't rely on, policing for public safety or for public health. What does a society look like in which everyone has a safe and affordable place to live. These are things that have never existed in the United States, and really in very few places, if any, but artists can show us the way. And I think it's absolutely crucial. And, we need to let them lead in telling that story, because as a lawyer, I know that when we try to tell it, we're probably going to screw it up. So I really think artists are going to be key also to bridging ideological divides, bringing us together around shared values and vision.
Thank you so much, Alan, for giving us a great, brilliant wrap up. Like, artists are the future. We believe that the artists are the future, to quote Whitney Houston, right? It is the children. But I think there's so much that has come from this conversation. There's so much that people, not only you, the panelists, but also you, the audience, have given us. And I think, if anything, I'm really so glad to be able to come back to this conversation and hear the different thoughts and highlights and make my little notes. There's so much that we kind of grasp on here, and I really appreciate you wanting to go a little bit further in the conversation, and I really appreciate all the insights we got from the audience. If you would, before we sign off, would you please share anything that you want people to definitely check out that you're doing today or look out for in the future? Any other ways that we can support you at all in any way possible?
Yeah, well, buy 1/6, the graphic novel. It's available on Amazon. It's available at 16comicsstore.com. So ONESIX comicsstore.com. And that free education and action guide that I mentioned is available at 16comics.com or from the Western States Center. And also, those of you who are comic book geeks like me, go to your comic book store. Ask them if they're carrying it. They might be, a few are. But if they say no, say, hey, this is an amazing series. I hope you'll order it, because that's how we'll reach people, who are just looking for a great story, but can have their eyes open to a new narrative.
And I'll just piggyback on that. The comic book, if you were a teacher, if you were an educator, if you are a historian, if you are a nonprofit leader, you might want to check this out as a teaching device. It is not just a fictional work. There are entire sections of it make it very clear that these are documented facts. It's like a documentary film embedded in a Marvel film. So check that historical, accurate part of it. I think it's very informative. There's a lot of facts that are themselves mind-blowing around what happened on January 6th. And yeah, last parting thought is just, we're looking for places to find hope that would bring us to a place of action. But I think we just need to reverse that whole framework. It's not hope that creates action. It's action that creates hope. So find places to get involved with other people at the local level. Start working on those solutions that are the seeds of the next system that we can build together. And and take care of yourselves and each other.
Thanks, everybody. So many resources and great quotes in the comments, by the way, and thoughtful things to sit with. As I had mentioned at the top of this conversation, I have a docu-series on PBS, short documentary films, 20 minutes long, that are being premiered every 2 weeks on PBS YouTube and the app. Please watch it. Yeah, and give us the numbers on YouTube. We love seeing the uptick. We're already at almost 500,000 for 2 videos, which we had no idea that folks were so primed to have this discussion of who Muslims were on this land and how we could retell the story of landmark moments in US history through the lens of a Muslim figure, character, or family. So please check that out. Fill in the comments. I'm an executive producer on this project, and we're trying to also figure out how we can do another series of 6 films. I would say that related to Gan's suggestion of acting as a form of vision culture work to be involved in, I was one of the co-founders of an organization called Believers Bailout that was motivated by getting Muslims involved in abolition work. And so what we realized we needed people to do is be involved in doing abolitionist work first to be part of the movement. And so we created this guide and framework and then practice of bailing folks out as part of doing abolition work. So be involved, do the work, and see you on the side of a creative, new, imagined future.
Thank you for being inspiring and inspiring others. So much thanks to each and every one of you, Gon, Alan, and Maytha. So excited to see all of the things that come from the amazing work that you're doing and continuing the conversation on and offline. Please be sure to follow us at the Opportunity Agenda, at Op Agenda, on Instagram, TikTok, and subscribe to our YouTube for more conversations like this. We will be releasing updated tips on how to navigate difficult holiday conversations soon. So be on the lookout for that. It will go on our website, and that will also be an email update that we'll share. So please subscribe for email updates, and you'll be able to connect with that guide as well as new resources and tools that we will be making available for the next round of things. Thank you so much. Appreciate all of your time spent with us and the extended time as well. And until next time, bye.